Okay, so get this. A pro-Russia candidate just won the first round of the presidential election in Romania.
Yeah.
But, like, this wasn't just, like, some, narrow victory or anything like that.
No.
This was a total upset, like, seriously, against all the polls, all the expert analysis.
Yeah, I mean, you really have to understand just how unexpected this was. Like,
Yeah.
Romania is a NATO member. They've been, totally opposed to Russia's actions in Ukraine. So to see this happen, it was a huge red flag.
Yeah, it definitely raised some eyebrows. I mean, how do you even explain that? And what's even more interesting is how Romania responded. They actually declassified intelligence documents.
Oh, wow.
Specifically to show people what had happened.
Wow. That's a pretty big deal.
It is a really big deal.
Yeah.
So what did these documents reveal?
Well, they showed pretty clear evidence of a coordinated disinformation campaign.
Okay, so not just your average, like, fake news stuff.
No, this is much more sophisticated, much more subtle.
Interesting.
And honestly, maybe even more dangerous because it targeted something deeper.
Oh, okay, so, like, what exactly are we talking about here? How did this campaign actually work?
So the documents point to a tactic called Disinfolklore.
Disinfolklore.
It's basically about manipulating people's emotions and their understanding of their own culture through things like memes and stories.
So using things that are supposed to be fun and relatable to spread disinformation.
Exactly. It's like hacking our culture.
That's seriously creepy. And the documents actually named TikTok as, like, a key platform for spreading this disinfolklore in Romania.
Yes, they did. And that raises some big questions about the role of social media in all of this.
Right. Like, was TikTok actively involved, or were they just used by somebody else?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? It's a tough one.
It really is. All right, well, let's back up for a second and talk about how this actually worked in Romania. How are they using TikTok to sway voters?
Okay, so they weren't just like directly pushing pro-Russia propaganda. That would have been way too obvious and probably backfired. Instead, they focused on tapping into anxieties and fears that already existed in Romanian society.
Can you give me, like, a specific example? Like, what kinds of anxieties?
Sure. So Romania being a NATO member and so close to the war in Ukraine, there's obviously a lot of worry about security, national identity, things like that.
Right, makes sense. Be right on the doorstep of a conflict like that.
Exactly, and that's what they exploited. So instead of saying Russia is great, it was more like, subtle messages about Romania's leadership being weak.
Oh, I see.
Or ineffective at protecting the country.
So playing on people's desire for safety and security.
Exactly, and that's what makes this so effective. It bypasses our critical thinking because it feels familiar, even funny sometimes.
So it's like we don't see it as a threat because it's coming from sources we trust, like our friends sharing memes.
Exactly, and what makes it even more complicated is that this isn't just some random group of people. The documents actually identify a network of nations they call the Axis of Misogyny that are working to undermine democracies around the world using these tactics.
Okay, now you're really freaking me out.
Yeah, it's pretty unsettling.
Axis of misogyny. That's a scary thought.
It is, and you know who's part of it? Countries like Russia, China, Iran, North Korea.
And their goal is to basically make people lose faith in democracy.
Yeah, and make the world more open to authoritarianism.
Yeah.
And they're doing it in part by using this disinfolklore to weaponize cultural anxieties and biases.
Okay, so this is all giving me chills, and it's about to get even worse.
Yeah.
Remember Brad Parscale, Trump's old campaign guy?
Yeah, I remember him.
Well, get this. He's actually admitted to using strategies that are basically the same as the ones described in those Romanian documents.
Oh, wow, so they're not just using this overseas, they're doing it here in the U.S. too.
That's what it looks like. And that means we need to be paying attention because this disinfolklore stuff isn't just some abstract threat. It's happening right here, right now.
Exactly, and it's affecting us in ways we might not even realize.
So this disinfolklore, it's spreading through platforms like TikTok. It's being used by foreign governments and American political strategists. This is some heavy stuff.
It is, and we're just getting started.
I know in part 2, we'll look at how exactly this whole thing went down in Romania and how they were so effective.
Right, we need to understand how they did it so we can learn from it.
Absolutely, because it's a warning for all of us about this new kind of information warfare.
A warning we should definitely heed.
Thank you for listening to the Daily Mind Brew podcast. Democracy isn't a spectator sport. Check out the podcast summary for key takeaways and actions you can take to be a defender of democracy today. And now, back to the conversation.
Last time we were talking about disinfolklore and how it was used to manipulate voters in Romania.
Right.
Let's dig into the specifics a bit. How did they actually pull this off?
Well, the people behind this, they really understood Romanian culture.
Uh-huh.
And they used that to their advantage. They weren't just like shoving pro-Russia stuff down people's throats.
Right.
It was way more subtle than that.
Yeah.
They were playing a much smarter game.
So less like Russia is great and more like Romania's leaders are failing you.
Exactly. They were tapping into anxieties and frustrations that were already there.
Like what kind of anxieties?
Well, for one thing, the economy was a big concern for a lot of Romanians. So they kind of twisted things to make it seem like the government was responsible for people's financial problems.
I see.
And that a pro-Russia candidate would like magically fix everything.
Like twisting the narrative to fit what people are already feeling.
Exactly. And there are some really interesting examples in the intelligence documents.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Where one thing that really stood out was they used memes with traditional Romanian imagery, like old symbols, mythical creatures.
Okay, so like ancient Romanians.
Yeah, and these memes were often funny, lighthearted.
Yeah.
But underneath, they were sending a much deeper message.
What kind of message?
They were basically saying that Romania had lost its way, abandoned its traditions, that by being part of the West, like with NATO and the EU,
right,
Romania was giving up its identity, becoming like a puppet of foreign powers.
So a bit of nostalgia and a bit of fear-mongering all mixed together?
Exactly. They were playing on national pride and this idea that going back to traditional values and being closer to Russia would make Romania great again.
That's a powerful message, especially for people who feel like they've been left behind.
Exactly. And what's even more amazing is how they managed to fit all of that into something as simple as a meme.
Yeah, it's really impressive how they do that.
It's like they understood their audience perfectly.
Oh, they definitely did. And they didn't just use the same message for everyone. They targeted different groups with different messages.
Like how so?
Well, for younger voters, they focused on the economic benefits of being closer to Russia. Promising jobs, investments, things like that.
Okay.
But for older voters, they talked more about traditional values and preserving Romanian culture.
So it's like a multi-pronged attack.
Exactly. They hit different groups with messages that were tailored just for them.
Wow, and the craziest thing is it didn't even feel like propaganda.
Right.
It just felt like normal stuff that people would share online.
And that's what makes it so effective. So how did TikTok play into all of this?
Well, TikTok's algorithm, the thing that decides what you see, it's designed to show you stuff that's really engaging and personalized to your interests.
Yeah, if you like this, you'll love this.
Exactly. And that creates these echo chambers where people only see stuff that reinforces what they already believe.
Okay, but how did the Disinfolklore campaign use that?
They figured out how to game the algorithm.
Really?
They created content that was specifically designed to go viral on TikTok.
So it wasn't just random pro-Russia videos?
No, they used popular music and eye-catching visuals.
Oh, so they were making stuff that actually looked like it belonged on TikTok.
Exactly. They understood that they had to blend in to make their message seem like it was coming from regular people.
Wow, so they were basically playing the TikTok game better than anyone else.
You could say that. And they use that to spread their message really effectively.
Okay, so we've got this foreign power using cultural anxieties and biases to manipulate people. And they're doing it through TikTok. But the Romanian intelligence documents also mentioned something else, that they were specifically targeting women with a lot of misogynistic content.
Oh, that's right. And that's a really important part of this whole Disinfolklore strategy.
How so?
It goes back to that axis of misogyny we talked about.
Right.
They're not just trying to win one election, they're trying to undermine democracy itself.
Yeah.
And one way they're doing that is by targeting women.
How did that work?
Well, by spreading content that puts women down, reinforces these old-fashioned gender roles, and attacks women in positions of power. It creates this atmosphere of fear and resentment.
Wow, I never thought of it that way.
It's a really insidious tactic because it divides society,
Right.
makes it harder for people to agree on anything.
So it's not just about politics, it's about something much bigger.
Exactly. It's about rolling back the progress that women have made.
And they're doing through these really subtle means.
Exactly. And the scary thing is it seems to be working.
So we've got this foreign power using TikTok to manipulate cultural anxieties and biases through Disinfolklore.
Yeah.
And they're targeting women specifically. But the big question is, did it actually work? Did this whole thing actually influence the election?
That's the question everyone wants to know the answer to.
Yeah.
And it's a really tough one to answer definitively.
So we've been talking about this crazy Disinfolklore campaign in Romania.
Right, lots of twists and turns.
And like how they use all this cultural stuff, memes, even TikTok's algorithm to get their message out there.
Exactly. It's been a wild ride.
And we talked about how they specifically targeted women with all this like misogynistic content.
Right, a really insidious tactic.
But the big question is, did any of it actually work?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Did this whole Disinfolklore thing really influence the election results?
Right, because it's one thing to like spread all this stuff online, but it's another thing to actually change how people vote.
Exactly. And it's almost impossible to say for sure. You can't just like run a controlled experiment with voters, you know?
Like expose one group to Disinfolklore and another group to like, I don't know, cat videos.
Exactly. Real life is way too messy for that.
Yeah, there are just too many factors at play in an election.
Exactly. You've got the economy, social trends, scandals, all kinds of things.
Right. So how can we even tell if this Disinfolklore stuff is actually working?
Well, it's not a perfect science, but there are some ways to get a sense of its impact.
Okay. Like what?
Well, one way is to look at how public opinion changes over time.
Okay.
So if you see a sudden shift in how people feel about a candidate, and that happens at the same time as a surge in Disinfolklore content, well, that could be a sign that something's up.
So it's kind of like tracking a virus.
Yeah.
Looking for those outbreaks.
That's a good way to think about it. Another thing you can do is look at social media data to see how this content is being shared. If certain messages are going viral and reaching a huge audience, that suggests the campaign is gaining traction.
And I imagine the Romanian intelligence agencies had access to all that data from TikTok.
Oh yeah, they did. And their analysis showed that this Disinfolklore campaign was really effective at reaching people.
So they could actually see it happening.
Yeah, they saw a clear link between the spread of certain narratives and a drop in support for the government.
Wow. So while we can't say for sure that this campaign like single-handedly won the election for the pro-Russia candidate,
right,
it definitely seems like it had a big impact.
Most experts agree on that. And it's a serious wake-up call because it shows that Disinfolklore isn't just some theoretical threat.
Right.
It's a real thing that can manipulate voters and influence elections.
Okay, so this is pretty scary stuff. So what can we do about it?
Well, the first step is awareness.
Okay.
The more people understand how Disinfolklore works, the better they'll be at spotting it and resisting it.
So it's all about education.
Exactly. And there are some practical things we can do too.
Oh, okay, I'm all ears.
The first thing is be careful of content that plays on your emotions.
Right, because that's how they get you.
Exactly. Disinfolklore often uses things like fear, anger, nostalgia to make you turn off your critical thinking.
So if something online makes you really emotional, just take a step back and think about it.
Exactly. Ask yourself why you're feeling that way. Is it genuine or is someone trying to manipulate you?
That's really good advice.
Yeah.
Okay.
What else? Another thing is always check your sources. If something seems fishy, don't just take it at face value.
Yeah.
Look for evidence from sources you trust. Fact-checking websites can be helpful.
So basically, don't believe everything you read on the internet.
Pretty much. And finally, try to get your information from a variety of sources.
Okay.
Don't just rely on social media, read different publications, listen to different perspectives.
So basically, be mindful, be skeptical, and be curious.
Exactly. Those are great rules to live by in the age of Disinfolklore.
Okay, so this has been a really fascinating look at Disinfolklore.
Yeah, definitely eye-opening.
We've seen how it was used in Romania,
Yeah.
but the implications are much wider.
It's a global problem.
It really is, and it affects all of us. So the big takeaway here is that we can't just sit back and do nothing.
Right, we all have a role to play in fighting this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the next time you're scrolling online and you see something that seems a little too perfect or a little too good to be true, just remember what we talked about today. Question it, research it, and don't let yourself be manipulated.
It's about taking back control of our information.
Exactly. Thanks for joining us.